using emotions for effectiveness. So this skill is called using because it suggests, here's this information, what can I do with this information? And we have two lenses on this. The first is before you get into the environment, which is about visualization, and then during the environment, which is a bit like what a facilitator would do. So the questions are, can I adapt my mood and that of others to be more effective? And can I visualize events before I attend them and then do what's called flicking the switch emotionally? And I'll talk about some of the skills that relate to that. And why are we doing this is because our emotions influence our thoughts and behaviour. If we know which emotions can assist us to be effective or helpful or more skilled, then why not use them? Why not adapt to them? And secondly, we know that there's a very large body of research about these concepts, about how emotions influence our perception and our judgment and how we think and how we decide. And you only have to think of really, really simple examples of when we get this right or wrong. For example, have you ever sent off an email in anger and then thought, oh my goodness, that's now out in the ether. Too late now, I can't withdraw it. Have you ever been doing a task and it's just not working for you? You feel like you're brain dead and you go for a little walk and you come back and suddenly your brain livens up. The point being, it's not actually about your brain or your cognition. It's about the mood that you're in for the task. So emotions and thoughts are intertwined. They're not separable. This idea that you can sort of dissect them into two separate things is not true. We're always feeling something. My father used to say to me, why don't you make that decision and put your emotions aside? Well, good luck. You can't do that. You're always feeling something. And so what you better do, of course, is manage your emotions so that they're useful for what you're deciding, what you're doing, how you're acting. And so people think and decide in part based on how they're feeling. So the skill here is, can I pick the right mood for the task? It's called mood task match. Can you generate an emotional state that actually helps you solve a problem? And just think about how true that is for you. When you're feeling in that right emotional frame, how effective you can be as opposed to something different. And that's true in all sorts of endeavours, including things like sport. Now, why is there such a lot of effort nowadays put into the psychology of elite athletes? And so how does that complex set of emotions impact on your effectiveness to task? So in simple terms, it works a bit like this. If you're doing activity where you are required to be imaginative, to have a big picture, to be creative or inventive, it's better to be in an affirming, positive mood. Now, it sounds like the bleeding obvious, but the question is, can you do that? Can you adapt to that? Can you create that? Now, what sort of mood is useful for that kind of activity? If you're doing something like the budget, where your head's down, you're buried in the details, stuck in the data, it's a completely different mood setting. You need to be neutral and a bit flat. And you can get shifted out of that really quickly, sometimes when you don't even want to. And can I give you an example of exactly what I'm talking about? I was working with a team, and you'll associate with this, I'll bet, working with a team, and we were doing a very heads down, concentrated analytic activity in the room, 20 people or so in the room. And they were doing a brilliant job of it. They were very focused, they were very attentive, they were working hard at the task, and it was a complex, difficult task. So we'd created a setting where that would work. And it was a bit like a boardroom setting, quite deliberately. It didn't have multi-lighting or flashing bells and whistles. It was quite neutral, dampened down, quite deliberately, so that they would focus on the task. And they did, and they were. And then about halfway through it, somebody from media and comms in the organisation came into the room, unannounced, and interrupted the room and said, hello, everybody. I'm going around the organisation filming the Christmas video song. And she handed out the words of the song to everybody and got them to stand up in sort of a choral assembly with her video recorder as they sang very unenthusiastically the Christmas song, which was being recorded. You can imagine, if you're a raging introvert, how much you love doing this. and finished the song, and off she went smiling and happy that she completed her task. And I thought to myself, this will be a very interesting example of this skill. What happens now? And so I said to them, okay, off you go back to the task. Now, you can guess what happened to the task. I'll bet you can work it out. And if you can't, I'll tell you, they were hopeless. They were beyond incompetent. They were like the worst behaved school kids fooling around, making jokes. They could not do it at all. They had become incompetent. Now, were they actually incompetent? No. The mood had changed to something which was frivolous and distracted and theatrical for a task that was actually detailed, focused and concentrated. So I let it go for 5 minutes and then I said, forget it. Let's go and have a coffee break and we'll come back. So again, we're flicking the mood again to get them back and focused on the task. So that's the first skill. It's about facilitation, really. It's what great facilitators do. They always have a kit bag of tricks, and you should too. How are you going to change the mood? How are you going to flick it up? Do you have a coffee break? Do you have a stretch? Do you break into small groups? Are you conscious about the room, its lighting, its temperature, the nature of the seating? This is what great facilitators do. So that's your first skill. It's an in-the-moment skill. So think of it as having a repository of, if you like, party tricks for flicking that mood around. And you can do it for yourself too. You know that what happens when you're sitting on a task and it's not working and you move away from the task and come back and do it. When I was involved in education, we used to teach kids in exam settings that if you got into the room and you're looking at the exam paper and nothing's happening in your brain, the worst thing you can do is plow on, because you can't. So close your eyes, turn the paper over, breathe, come back, and it's remarkable how often your brain lights up and you can come back into the task. The second bit is called emotional imagination, and the great skill here is called flicking the switch. So emotional imagination is literally like you would see an athlete visualizing an event before they do the event. And you'll see this, high jumpers, swimmers and the like. I used to be involved a lot in swimming, and our great national swimmers in that pursuit would always do this. They would be playing the race, the race in their heads. Why? So they could get into that competitive mood. So by the time they went and jumped in the water, they'd already run the race. They knew exactly what it felt like. So they actually parked the anxiety of the event and focused on what was about to happen. So this is a real skill, and it is a predictor of empathy. And you can imagine why, because empathy is being able to take on the feelings of others. So people who are good at this can literally flick the switch from one environment to the other. And they do it by suspending that feeling and moving to the new feeling, which is appropriate for the activity. Example, have you ever had a dinner party and you and your partner have had an awful fight about 5 minutes before the guests arrive? Please don't tell me I'm the only person that has happened to. And so what happens? Well, you can't carry that over to your guests. That would be unsociable and inappropriate. So for most of us, we try and cover up. We try and pretend it didn't happen. But people who are very skilled in this can actually visualize their guests coming, flick their mood to the appropriate mood for that environment, and park and suspend what was happening and then come back to it. That's a high level skill. For most of us, we have to kind of pretend and mask. And of course, if your dinner guests are smart readers emotionally, they'll pick it up anyway. They'll say, did you two have a fight? Or is there some problem? Is there something going on? So the great skill here is being able to flick the switch.